Good morning. This hearing will come to order. Senator Carper is on his way, and his staff informed me that we could get underway here. So I would like to, without objection, enter my opening comments into the record. Hearing no objection, so ordered. As I was talking to the witnesses before the hearing here, this is our fifth in a series of 4 hearings on border security. And what we are trying to do is we're trying to lay out the reality, and I think Senator Booker would agree with me. It's not a pleasant reality. It's an enormously difficult problem, and of course, in terms of illegal immigration, in terms of drug trafficking, you know, the biggest problem is, no doubt about it, it's on the southern border. As my ranking member says repeatedly, and I completely agree with this coming from a manufacturing background, we really need to analyze the root cause of the problem. We had an extremely good meeting with General Kelly, head of Southern Command, yesterday, and just discussing the problems in Central America and problems with border security and the drug trafficking, and looking for that root cause. We were discussing it's really America's demand for drugs. How that demand has created these drug cartels that have really corroded, been so harmful to the societies in Central America. We bear some responsibility for that. So these are not going to be easy problems to solve, but we have to make incremental improvements. I come from a manufacturing background. Nothing's ever perfect. You always have to continuously improve. So again, the purpose of this hearing and every hearing is to get the people watching, people in the dais here, admitting we have the problem by trying to lay out that reality properly. So I see that my ranking member, our ranking member, has joined us here. So I'd like to turn it over if you've got some opening comments.
I'd love to. Not too long.
And thank you, Mr. Hartunian. Thank all the witnesses for your testimony. Certainly one of the purposes of this hearing is to try and get some sense for where our main problems occur. We have limited resources, so we have the southern borders, we have the maritime borders, we have the northern border. So I'd like to go to you, Chief Fisher, and first just talk about, in general, the basic extent of the problems. The stats I have is that on the southwest border we had 480,000 apprehensions of people crossing this country illegally. In the northern border, a little over 3,000. Obviously we have a much larger border. The bigger problem in terms of illegal immigration is coming through the southern border. In testimony, we've had contradictory testimony on this. That apprehension, according to the Customs and Border Patrol, is about 75% is what we believe we're apprehending. We've had some CBP agents say it's somewhere between 30 and 40. Again, I realize it's very difficult to get that number. Do we have some sense of what the apprehension rate is on the northern border?
Mr. Chairman, the effectiveness rate is primarily used on the southern border because at that point along the southern border years ago, we have defined the threat, among other things, as flows of people. On the northern border, that's not necessarily the case. The threat is defined in different ways. So using an effectiveness rate like we do on the southern border to the northern border really doesn't make a lot of sense to us. What we do when we take a look at our strategy and looking to where should we deploy our finite resources, we looked a few years ago, and if you take a look at approximately 90% of the Canadian population lives within 100 air miles of the border, and then you take that 4,000 miles and look where the density of population areas are, where transnational criminal organizations and potential people seeking entry between the ports of entry need to operate. It's very concentrated in some of those areas. Our resourcing, deployments, and redeployments try to match those areas, and it's driven primarily by intelligence.
Okay, but again, is your sense that we really do apprehend a higher percentage on the northern border versus the southern border, or less? I mean, again, and I'd ask anybody else who'd want to chime in on that one.
We don't measure that in terms of the effectiveness rate, sir. My sense would be it is at or higher than the southern border, primarily because of the flow rate is so low.
What about in terms of drug trafficking? Do we have any statistics in terms of the total number of tons coming from the southern border versus the drugs being trafficked through the northern border? I mean, is it 10%? Is it 5%?
I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman, but I will tell you it's considerably less in terms of the smuggling that occurs between the ports of entry on the northern border than what we see on the southern border.
Again, we've had testimony from General McCaffrey, for example, on the southern border, estimate somewhere between 5 to 10% of all drugs are interdicted, which means, 90 to 95% are getting through. Would we have a similar type of interdiction rate on the northern border? Anybody want to answer that might have some sense of that? Or do we simply not know?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with the general's methodology on that. Generally, when we look at seizure rates along the northern border versus the southern border, we don't measure that in terms of the comparison to differentiate threat.
In terms of the drugs that are flowing through, we've had, again, contradictory testimony on the southern border. We've had one witness saying that the majority of those drugs flow through the actual ports of entry. Other witnesses say that no, they go around the ports of entry. Do we have any sense on the northern border where the primary drug trafficking is occurring? Are they coming smuggled literally through the ports of entry and lack of detection, or are they coming through, the vast, unmonitored parts of the border? Anybody want to answer trying that one? Mr. Spero.
Yes, Senator. One of the things that I would say about the flow of drugs on the northern border is it's certainly bi-directional. So certain drugs are coming in from Canada, certain types of drugs are still coming in from Canada, and other drugs are being exported from the U.S. and going from the U.S. into Canada. As far as the difference between whether or not we're making investigations at drugs being interdicted either at the port of entry or between the ports, we're seeing both, just in some cases different drugs. The case that I spoke about on during my oral statement was a case where the tractor-trailer that was being used by the drug smuggling organization to get cocaine from the Ontario, California part, part of where the drugs were being stored at the warehouse, was actually being transported across the U.S. and through the Port of Buffalo, and were supposed to be delivered to Canada. That particular method was in a trap or a concealed compartment. It was actually under the floorboards of the tractor trailer. That had that particular delivery been successful, that would have been a case of drug smuggling going into Canada through the ports of entry. But likewise, we still see, smuggling. I believe it was Mr. Hartunian and Mr. Rodriguez who were talking about the hockey bags coming across in between the ports, whether those are hockey bags of marijuana or some other kind of drug. We get referrals from both the Border Patrol, who make those interdictions between the ports, as well as we do from the Office of Field Operation, who are making those interdictions at the ports. So we're seeing a mix from Homeland Security investigations, sir.
One huge difference between the borders, south versus north, is the cooperation of the bordering country. And we obviously have far greater cooperation between the U.S. and Canada than we have with the U.S. and Mexico, which makes our job a whole lot easier. We did, on March 16, 2015, we've entered into or signed an agreement on land, rail, marine, and air transport pre-clearance, which is going to require legislation on both sides of the border here. But Chief Fisher, can you just speak to the difference between the cooperation we have with the Mexican government versus the cooperation we have with the Canadian difference, and how what an enormous difference that makes?
Well, information for us is the key to be able to reduce any vulnerabilities, regardless of what border we're talking about. And in particular with Canada, what we have found over the years is the information sharing is really good. It gets better. I have the opportunity to have 3 Border Patrol agents that are embedded with the RCMP in Canada, with a 4th to come along shortly this year. And having a Border Patrol agent in Canada working with the RCMP only bolsters our ability to understand the evolving threats and helps us secure the border on both sides.
So that type of model, that we have with Canada, if we could implement something similar in Mexico, would make a tremendous difference?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it would.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Fisher. Senator Carper.
I think the question the chairman raised is just really important one. And to the extent that we can grow, strengthen our relationship with Mexico, improve our confidence in the information that they can provide them and that they can provide us, will only help. I think could be maybe one of the best force multipliers on the Canadian border is our relationship with Canada. And
Thanks, Senator Heidkamp. I wish I would have been here for your questioning, because I know this obviously affects your state quite a bit, what's happening on the border. Chief Fisher, I do want to go back a little bit to the question from Senator McCain in terms of what is going to happen this year with the unaccompanied children. We shouldn't be minimizing this. Yeah, it's down from last year, but last year was a humanitarian crisis. I don't know what you call 60% level or where are we at in terms of, the total number that have come compared to last year? We're somewhere around 60, 70% of last year's problem, correct?
Well, Senator, just so I'm clear, it was not my intent to minimize that flow, what happened last year by any stretch. And just looking at it, because it's more of a statistical anomaly last year. For us, it's people coming across the border for a variety of reasons. And when we see what happened, for instance, last year in South Texas, what the Department of Homeland Security did this year. And by the way, I should also mention, each and every year over the last 3 years, we have seen increases from individuals from Central America coming between the ports of entry. What changed last year was not necessarily the seasonal trends. That continued almost exactly the way it has been over the years. What did change was the volume. And what we tried to do, and what we did do with the Secretary's leadership, is start looking at, after July, when the numbers started going down, was really looking back and say, one, how can we be better prepared, not just to react to it, but really to better predict it. The other interesting, at least it was interesting for me to see in how the Secretary approached this, is the Department of Homeland Security was one of 3 departments that had equities and jurisdictional authority to respond to this. When you take a look at Health and Human Services, that is a very big piece when it comes to unaccompanied children. You look at the Department of Justice in terms of not just the prosecution, but what do we do across the board between the 3 different departments. That, I think, was the first time in my experience where we started seeing peaks of volumes along the border.
But there was, I just have to stop you because you used the word, that was a statistical anomaly. No, it was far more than a statistical anomaly. I mean, it was a humanitarian crisis.
I don't
and it was
that.
It was one that was fueled by the actions of this government, this administration. I mean, I don't have the chart here. We've used in other hearings, but we have a chart that shows, really the number of unaccompanied children coming from Central America declining. At I guess called a manageable level. I think under 10,000. Again, I don't know the exact numbers. I don't have the chart. But then you had deferred action on childhood admissions, and that just shot up. I mean, it was cause and effect. It was very clear. And by the way, in our trip down to McAllen, Texas, I want to commend the Customs and Border Patrol and the really tremendous effort that they put forward to address that humanitarian crisis, but it continues at a 60 or 70% level. It's still a problem. And just having met with General Kelly, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I think he's certainly confirming what is my sense, is that no matter what deferred action childhood admissions says, no matter what the deferred action on parents, whatever, no matter what those memorandum, those executive actions say, it's what is the reality. And the reality is, if you're a parent or a child in Central America and you send your child or you come up and you get into America, bottom line is you're staying. That's what the coyotes are telling them. Even though we have a counter communications strategy to say, no, this doesn't apply to you, the reality is it does apply. And I have to admit, as I've delved into this problem, and I know you are Customs and Border Protection, the conclusion I'm really coming to is you could almost be renamed Customs and Border Processing, because that's certainly what I saw in McAllen, Texas. And as long as we continue to apprehend these individuals, as long as we have these incentives for people to come into this country because they realize that they get here, they are going to be able to stay. As long as we detect them, apprehend them, and then process them with a notice to appear, and then disperse them around America into the shadows, we're going to continue to have that problem. So we need to recognize that reality, and we need to start addressing it. I guess this is a pretty good staff work here. They've given me my chart, which pretty well shows the reality of the situation. So this is far more than a statistical anomaly. This is something that our immigration laws, executive actions actually caused. And until we're willing to admit that reality, we're not going to stop it. We're going to continue to have this human crisis occurring. Maybe it's only 60 or 70% level, but it's still a humanitarian crisis from my standpoint. Do you want to respond to that at all? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, Senator, I do want to thank you for complimenting the men and women in Rio Grande Valley and in the greater South Texas. I, too, have been down there and very proud of the work that they do each and every day to protect this country. Thank you, sir.
Well, okay. I do want to really get back to the northern border and the drug trafficking there, because, again, if you really take a look at the root cause of so much of our border insecurity, it is the insatiable demand for drugs in this country and what that has spawned over the last 50, 60 years. Really, our demand has caused so much of this problem, so much of this crisis. So I want to get some kind of sense of what is happening on the northern border, where it is flowing. Listen, I go every year up fishing in Canada. I've gone through those ports of entry. Pretty calmly, a bunch of folks with fishing boats. But I also understand how porous that border is as well. Just, hop in a canoe and all of a sudden you're a camper and who knows what you're transporting. So understanding we don't have the statistics, which is part of the problem, by the way, in evaluating how to provide greater security at the border, we don't have the information. And there's a real disparity in information, whether Customs and Border Patrol or Protection is talking about a 70%, 75% apprehension rate versus agents on the ground saying it's only 30 or 40%. So I want to get, again, some sense what is happening on the northern border specifically, as best as people can tell. And I realize you don't have exact information, but is the drug smuggling, is the human trafficking, would the potential terrorists that we're concerned about, are they going to come through the ports of entry, or are they going to be coming through the areas in between the ports of entry? I mean, can anybody address that basic question? Mr. Spero.
Yes, Senator, thank you. From our investigations, and again, we get a lot of referrals. A lot of our casework does come from referrals from either the ports of entry, the OFO, or between the ports from the Border Patrol, but not all of our investigations are referrals. Some of them are from our own confidential informants or from other federal, state, and local partners. We understand that, one day the vulnerability could be at the port. One of the ways that we look at national security is that it's our job to make sure that we're investigating criminal fraud cases when it comes to people either pretending or making themselves appear that they're eligible for an entry visa to come into the country, whether that's a student who's coming in under a different name or doesn't intend to go to school, or whether it's a worker who claims that they're going to be working at a particular job in a particular industry and had purchase that visa, or whether it's in the interior where the fraudsters are trying to go to one of our other sister agencies, Citizenship and Immigration Services, to obtain a permanent residence or maybe even eventual U.S. citizenship by any kind of fraud. So through our documented benefit fraud task forces, through our participations on the joint terrorism task forces, where we can bring HSI can bring our Title VIII Civil Immigration Authority, our abilities to investigate fraud, or our Title 19 Customs fraud. We're looking at all types of vulnerabilities. We're not just focusing on one. And so whether that's people who are flying directly into the country, right into the interior, but maybe on a fraudulent visa, or applied for asylum with some sort of fraudulent application, that's a big vulnerability, and that's something that we take seriously. But also some of our other national security strategies is to make sure that sensitive technologies we use our export enforcement and our counterproliferation program to make sure the sensitive technologies are not getting outside of the country.
Okay.
Yes,
Again, I think what I'm not getting, what I'm not hearing is some sense for how much of the problem is coming through our ports of entry, and whether we have to beef up personnel or improve the, fund them in a deficit-neutral fashion, or whether they're coming in between the ports of entry. And how do we ever get that information? I realize it's not the volume, so we're not, I guess, calculating percent apprehensions or anything else. Chief Fisher, would it make sense to utilize what drone flights we have? Would it make sense to have what detection capabilities we do have? Would it make sense based on the anecdotal arrest and apprehension rate, to do some level of statistical sampling, some kind of measurement to get some kind of information so that policymakers who are going to be tasked with allocating those scarce resources have some sense of where the problem does lie on the northern border. I mean, do you understand the issue, the information I'm looking for here in terms of where the problem lies and what we need to do to really assess the extent of it and direct, proper solutions?
I believe I do, Senator, and one of the things that, and certainly with the sake of time, I'd offer up the briefing to you or your staff. As was mentioned earlier, it's not as simplistic just to say, well, it's just happening at the ports, or it's just happening at the metrics that we use in terms of between the ports of entries. There are 12, and we take a look at trends, not just on the southern border. We take a look on the northern border, and we get, for instance, with John's folks and try to figure out, say for instance, in a place like Swanton. So what is the dynamic there in Swanton? What is the business model of the illicit networks that operate in Canada that are exploiting the U.S. border? That scenario, in terms of that threat, is likely to be different than Blaine, Washington, or in Detroit. And so for us to just, or at least for me, to simplistically say, well, it's just at the ports of entry or between the ports of entry, it really depends on the area of the border, and we do have methods to be able to inform our judgments on where those redeployments should go. And we'd be happy to sit down and explain that.
First of all, I'm not asking for simplicity here, because I realize it doesn't exist. This is incredibly complex, and it's sector by sector, and it's area by area, and state by state, and even beyond that. Again, I realize the Montana border is completely different than the canoe area, boundary water canoe area up in Minnesota, and Lake Superior and Detroit. I mean, this is a vast, vast border, and all kinds of differences. So I guess what I'll ask you, let's do a briefing. I want to understand the complexity. I want to understand exactly what you do know about anecdotally. Where have we seen? I mean, have people loaded up canoes? Are they flying it in small planes? Are they catapulting drugs across the border like they do, or with cannon? I mean, it's unbelievable. As I've delved into this situation, the number of methods, the ability to avoid detection, the use of the drug cartels, blocking off the bridges to these kids so that they can funnel them and put pressure, overload the system over here so they can, divert Customs and Border Patrol so they can smuggle the drugs over someplace else. Trust me, I understand the enormous complexity of the situation, but I don't have the information. Okay, I know it's complex, but I really don't know how complex. I'm not sure anybody does. But if we're gonna start crafting solutions to provide better border security, we need to better understand the complexity of it. So again, I'd look forward to a briefing.
Thank you.
I was kind of hoping Senator Ayotte wanted to come here and offer some questions. If she doesn't get here in time, let me first offer all of you the opportunity to make a final point. This is something Senator Carper has done. I learned from it. Certainly, if I was a witness, I'd be sitting here going, I want to make this point. So here's your opportunity. Make that final point. If Senator Ayotte gets here, we'll let her question. Otherwise, we'll close out the hearing. Chief Fisher, we'll start with you. I've got 4 minutes left to vote. You've already voted. So will you close out the hearing? Is that okie dokie? But I'm kind of a rookie here. Okay. Let me just say again, thank you all for the time you took. I read the testimony. It's all very thoughtful. I know there's a lot of work and detail that goes into it. So thank you for taking that time, taking your time here to come and testify. Your very thoughtful answers to our questions, and I want to thank all my colleagues. This is a very well-attended hearing, which I think indicates really how importantly we view this problem. But it also speaks to the complexity. There's an awful lot of questions that need, at least some answers, and I know those answers are very difficult to get to. So again, I want to thank you, and I'll turn it over to our ranking member.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Yeah, that is a really good point. I mean, my understanding is the same as yours, is that they are not using our watch list, and that's something I think we need to press to see what we can do to cooperate between the two governments. Correct. So again, thank you for coming. Again, thank you all for your time, your efforts, your testimony. This hearing record will remain open for 15 days until May 7th at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.